It's the Wilk Report. I'm Michael Wilk, coming to you from Cleveland, Ohio, with a bit of a response to a video that was put up by Council of Geeks on March 15th. Let me go ahead and turn off the title card here. Yeah, this is the URL. You can go visit it, and I'll put a link in the description below. All right, so what the video is about is kind of addressing LGBTQ plus representation and arguments of when it's done for the wrong reasons, and he attempts to kind of debunk some of the wrong reasons arguments that are given in response to the way LGBTQ plus people are not being inserted into popular media, such as, for example, STD on CBS, Paul Feig on Ghostbusters, although that's actually women in general, but it still kind of applies here under the blanket umbrella of representation. And then, of course, we've got Disney Star Wars with Admiral Holdo and other characters that are really cynically designed to pander to a particular target demographic, such as, in this instance, LGBTQ plus people. And I'm going to use that term out of respect for Council of Geeks and for people who use that, because I do consider myself an ally, even though I do identify as heterosexual and male, you know, because I'm born hardwired that way. Okay, that's you know, just to get off topic, there is a special, I think National Geographic did it, starring Katie Couric, where they explore some of the biological in utero developments that take place that can actually have an influence on people's sexual orientation and even why they might identify as the sex opposite of what they were born with. You know, the idea of transgender people identifying as the gender opposite of what they were, like, say, if you're born with male sex organs but you identify as female, and or identifying as male even though you were born with female sex organs. And there's actually a biological reason for this that takes place in the womb, partly as a result of chromosomes and partly as a result of hormones that are released during fetal development as a result of those chromosomal instructions. And, you know, basically it's a really good special. And, you know, again, I'll link to this below. And I highly recommend that you go ahead and watch it in full because it really is fascinating. And I think it is an excellent bit of education into why human biology and human genes are a lot more complicated than what we're initially taught in school, because we're only given the basics, and we end up, most of us, unless we go into biology as a major in school, you know, we really, when we're confronted by something that is outside of what we were taught in school, that's usually when problems start developing, because, you know, then people tend to react and get all bigoted and confrontational and, you know, often verbally and physically threatening, because their concept of what reality is in their mind is being threatened. So I do try to be as respectful as I can, because I do have friends and relatives who are LGBTQ, and, you know, again, I consider myself an ally. All right, so now that I've got this bit of a rambling introduction out of the way, all right, so just to kind of summarize what Council of Geeks is saying in the video, I tend to concur with most of it. What I don't agree with is the idea that it doesn't matter why there's representation in media. And basically, her argument is, you know, as long as there's representation, you know, that's good enough, basically. I mean, that's basically how in my opinion, you can boil down the argument. And, I'm not trying to criticize Council of Geeks or denigrate here for making that argument, because I suppose there is one school of thought where this argument makes sense, and why it's important that we do have representation, even if it is for quote unquote the wrong reasons. And my disagreement here is that actually it does matter why representation is done, and also how. Because if you don't do it the right way or for the right reasons, then what good are you really accomplishing? Because and the thing that Council of Geeks talks about is, for example, LGBTQ Pride Day at Disney, where they are basically pandering to the rainbow flag. All right, and it's a cynical and very corporate marketing ploy designed to appeal to a target demographic. And here is where I think it matters, because if you're doing it for the wrong reasons, then you're really not achieving the level of equity that you think you are. You're just having the illusion of it, and illusions tend to be very temporary. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the link here. And let me go ahead and highlight this portion here. This is on smallbusiness.cron.com about profit motivation. And the profit motive here is defined as, sometimes also called profit motivation. It refers to the economic statement that organizations need incentives to be persuaded to relinquish resources that are invested into operations. Simplified, this means that organizations must expect to receive something that is worth more than their investment before they are willing to invest. In most cases, this means that the organization expects to earn a profit on its transactions and investments. All right, so why is this important? Well, the reason it's important has to do with the effect of media in the construction of public belief in social change. And Catherine Happer, and this is on jspp.psychoopen.edu. And you can probably download the PDF. I'll include links to all of this in the description below, so you don't have to go hunting down for it. But the paper is one of many that describe how media has an impact on public belief, public attitudes, and on social change. And it's actually true. But let me go ahead and say here, and Nichelle Nichols, if you remember, famously described on how Martin Luther King Jr. convinced her to remain on Star Trek, the original 1960s show, because she was one of the earliest depictions of a black woman cast as a main character in a major television show, but she almost quit because she wanted to go and do other stuff. I mean, nobody thought that this show was going to last at the time that they were producing it. I mean, it was something that they were doing as a lark for a few years, to quote William Shatner's Get a Life sketch. And, so she wanted to move on and do other stuff, but Dr. King convinced her to stay. And the reason was that despite its lower ratings and the network's treatment of the show, it still had a very vocal and very passionate fan base. And, so there's, there was this reason that Dr. King had for wanting her to stay on, was that because it was important to have a character like Uhura on the show so that black girls would have a role model on television. Because role models are important. They can inspire you. They can influence you to do things that you might otherwise not have had the courage to do. So this was a very legitimate argument here. And, and it kind of acknowledges that, yes, there is an impact on the public consciousness when you engage in representation. All right, so this is actually a thing. The problem is that the way it's done, and the way it's especially being done now, where it's obviously quite cynical and you're being pandered to. So cleverism.com has an article where it talks about using corporate social responsibility to improve your brand, which is basically what Disney and CBS and Sony and a whole bunch of other media conglomerates are doing, because they are trying to sell you a product, and that product is tailored to appeal to as wide a demographic as possible. And to this end, then yes, they are going to want to tailor certain products to appeal to micro demographics, in this case LGBTQ plus persons. So let me go ahead and read here. It says, social responsibility is no longer a new term in business or other organizational settings. It has been around for a very long time. In fact, the golden rule is a representation of social responsibility, doing unto others what they want others to do for them. It was only in recent decades that it finally got a more formal and apt name to suit the setting and the expanding scope of that responsibility. And then, of course, it goes on to talk about the role of corporate social responsibility, basically as a marketing ploy. All right, and this is where I think it comes into matter, because, and also there's a scholarly paper by Glenn Hughes where it talks about representation, corporate culture, and the NBA. And a lot of this, I highly recommend you go read all of this, because it goes to explaining why corporations are engaging in this cynical pandering to what many on the far right, and even some who claim to be more in the political center, although there's really no such thing as a fixed political center, but that's a topic for another day. But, people on the far right, people who place themselves in the political middle, accuse people of being social justice warriors, or SJWs for short. And, then they get, very offended when they see characters or messaging being placed into movies and TV shows that they feel are pandering to social justice warrior mentality, basically, being shoved down their throats. And to a degree, there is some legitimacy to that argument. And I say to a degree because it's not, for the reasons that many of them think, because, the accusation is that there is, some kind of leftist or feminist or Marxist agenda being shoved down people's throats, trying to convert people. And it's really all bullshit, if you'll pardon my French. It's complete and utter bullshit, because it's got nothing to do with politics. To the extent that corporations and corporate executives have any ideology at all, it is the ideology of money, of maximizing profits. And you don't maximize your profit by selling to a little niche consumer group. All right. Henry Ford understood this back when he developed the automobile for sale. He understood that if you only market it towards the wealthy, well, yeah, you might make a little bit of profit short term, but what are you really accomplishing long term? Because trends tend to change, and if you're trying to market a product, well, you want it to have staying power, because otherwise what's the point of selling it? So Henry Ford, despite being a Nazi bastard sympathizer and collaborator, which if you read any history book on the subject, yeah, he did sell automotive parts and had business dealings with the Nazis, all right? But he still had an ounce of common sense. And so he priced his automobiles and paid his workers enough that they could afford to drive those machines, because his biggest seller, his most effective sellers of those automobiles were his employees. Because if your own employees can't afford to drive the vehicle, or if they don't have confidence enough in it to drive it themselves, well, that's going to create an image problem. And so, Ford was smart enough to engage in this sort of marketing that, made his company a success, and other automotive companies followed suit. So, as to why and how this affects representation for discriminated, disenfranchised communities such as LGBTQ people, for persons of color, for women. The way it affects them is because society has actually changed in the last 50, 60 years, all right? It is true, whether people want to acknowledge it or not, that audiences, yes, are more diverse, that more people are coming out of the closet than they were brave enough to do even 20 years ago, when, Matthew Shepard and others were literally dragged to their deaths by bigots who cannot tolerate even the existence of a person with a different sexual orientation. And so, it does matter. And because more people are out, they have less reasons to stay closeted. There's a less incentive to kind of pander to bigots. And there shouldn't be a reason to pander to bigots, all right? Bigotry is evil for a reason, okay? And if you go back and watch the original Twilight Zone, Rod Serling had episodes there where he, really showed his hatred for bigotry and the effects it had on society. For example, there was an episode depicting, it didn't actually show it on screen, but it alluded to it, but the lynching of a black man who was wrongly convicted of killing a white man. He actually did it in self-defense, but, Southern white justice convicted him of murder anyway, and he hanged. And the morning of the hanging, this dark cloud forms over the southern town where it takes place, and it doesn't go away. And that's meant to represent the dark cloud of bigotry all over the world. And it's not going to lift up until we stop this shit. So, all right. So why does it matter that we have representation? Well, again, I'm not disagreeing with Council of Geeks here. It matters because, it is a reality that audiences are more diverse, that there are more LGBTQ plus people who are out and feel that they are not adequately represented. There are more black people and Hispanic people and people of East Asian descent, of Near Eastern descent, who are in society, okay? America in 2019 is very different demographically from America in 1969. That's just a fact. All right. And, to see television shows where most characters are white, straight, Christian, it's just no longer accurately reflective of the society in which we live today. Now, there is a certain logic in having representation because, again, especially if you're in media and you want to sell movies and television shows, you want to appeal to those demographics, all right? Because your audience has changed and you have to be willing to adapt to that audience and meet its demands. But if you're only doing that in order to pander to a demographic, well, this goes back to the profit motivation, because if there's no profit to be seen in having representation in media for disenfranchised groups such as black people, such as Hispanics and Asians and LGBTQ+. If you remove that profit motivation, the representation goes away because, again, corporations want to maximize their profits. They are not going to risk the making of further profits by selling a product that no one's buying. And that's why I think it does actually matter, the reasons why there are representation. Because if you're only doing it to make money, well, then obviously, if you're not making money, the pride parades disappear, the representation goes away in media, and at that point, what have you really accomplished? You've basically gotten nothing achieved, because what achievements you thought you had were illusions. They were temporary and they didn't last. And so you end up really back at square one without adequate representation. And in that case, what have you spent all these years fighting for? At the end of the day, I mean, the reasons do matter, because if you're going to have representation, regardless of what group you're in, all right, whether you're gay or straight or bi or transgender or queer or gender fluid or whatever, whether you're black, Hispanic, Asian, Middle Eastern, Jewish. I mean, people forget, that William Shatner and Leonard Nimoy were a couple of Jewish guys who held, the rank of captain and first officer, respectively. So, that's another group that's been historically targeted for discrimination. So, and of course, when Gene Roddenberry had these characters on his original Star Trek show, and then later with Star Trek The Next Generation and its spin-offs Deep Space Nine and Voyager, you had diverse casts because Roddenberry's vision of the future was one in which things like racism and sexism were things of the past, all right? We had evolved beyond that point. We had to. I mean, it's just, in his worldview, it just simply made logical sense. We still had, many of the same problems we do today, with Cold Wars that could easily develop into hot wars, the Klingon Empire representing, both Soviet Russia and Communist China, serving as stand-in for those groups. And of course the conflict between the Federation and the Romulans and the Soviets. Well, I mean, the Romulans, I guess, could more accurately be used as a stand-in for Communist China back in the 60s. But, the point is, the problems that we had at that time were simply transposed into a futuristic setting. But Roddenberry wanted to have his vision of the future be one in which, we might still have those problems, but they're more ideological. They're not so much, based on such foolish concepts as racism or sexism or homophobia or whatever. You got your job based on merit rather than the color of your skin or your sex or your orientation or whatever. And so it was not controversial to have a black man put in charge of a space station on the edges of Federation space, and who played an integral role in averting, well, first in delaying a catastrophic war, and then by helping to end it. Because he was a commander who was black. In fact, actually, Avery Brooks in interviews has said, he didn't set out to play a black man who was captain. He just simply played it as another character who happens to be black, and he explained why he played it that way, because, again, it was in keeping with Roddenberry's original vision, but it also just kind of made sense in the future. If racism's gone, or at least gone to the extent that you're no longer seeing overt displays of it, or even covert displays, because, people don't even bother judging you based on that. Well, why would you need to play up to it? I mean, you just play the role of the captain, and that's it. And that's enough, actually, and it worked. And, same thing with Kate Mulgrew playing Captain Catherine Janeway. There wasn't really any expectation that she, when they had the shows, they were making it clear, the show's message was not going to be, oh, she's a woman, can't she really be captain? No, she is a captain, and no one's challenging that. Because the notion is that, once you reach a certain evolutionary development in your society, things such as gender-based discrimination or color-based discrimination, they just fall into obscurity. They no longer serve a useful purpose, and so you really are judged based on your abilities. Especially when it comes to inventions of technology like the replicator, that renders money obsolete. Again, your abilities become the form of currency because, money is obsolete. And so you have to find other ways of creating value. And the only way you can do that is by your actions. What you contribute to society as an individual, not as a member of a particular group. And that makes sense, all right? I mean, depictions like that, that's when you do representation right and for the right reasons. Because you're basically using media, again, to play a significant role in affecting public opinion and public views on social issues. So, there is a right way and a wrong way to do all this. I was just watching a video review of Shazam by Jessie Milestone on her channel, where she was talking about how there are characters in there, Billy Batson's adoptive family, where they've got a disabled kid, they've got a black kid, they've got an Asian kid, is perhaps stereotypically a computer whiz, but that's pretty much the only issue she really saw. But that's when you have representation that's done right and for the right reasons, because it reflects the situation, the society, and the the sensibilities of the audience in a way that doesn't talk down to us. And I think a lot of the problem we've got right now with CBS and its STD, with Disney and its cynical exploitation of Star Wars, and of course, with Paul Feig at Sony with his reboot of Ghostbusters, all of these had representations for reasons that had nothing to do with actually trying to change our attitudes with regards to representation. They just forced it down our throats in a way that insulted us and talked down to us and made it seem like, if you don't like having it in there, then you're racist or sexist or homophobic or whatever. And that's not why people were objecting. They were objecting because of the reasons why it was being put in there. Because don't fool yourself, okay? Even during the 1960s, it was a radical idea to have a show like Star Trek on the air where people who are of color, women, could hold positions of real power within a society or on a day-to-day community job like a starship, billions of miles away from home. The idea of having a Japanese helmsman and a black communications officer, which, is not exactly chump change as far as a function aboard a starship, because you're responsible as the chief communication officer for not only communicating with the people back home who are, like I said, billions and billions of miles away, across time and space. You're responsible for making sure that whatever intelligence comes in is not compromised. You're responsible for maintaining ship-to-ship communications with ship-wide internal communications, making sure all that runs smoothly. It's a job with a hell of a lot of responsibility that probably could have been explored a little more, I think, in depth, just, to try and explain why this role is important and why it's important that a black woman holds it, because, that's, you don't have to, be overt about it or talk down to people about it, but, just kind of explain how important that job is so that people get it into their heads, this is a pretty significant reason why it's being held by a black woman, and it's done, in a way that's not even close to being controversial within the context of the show. But if you're part of the audience in the 1960s, it was a big deal, and it was controversial, as was the, supposed interracial kiss between Uhura and Kirk, where, that was something that almost did not make it past the censors because the sponsors, were going apeshit. And, of course, it was a Hollywood kiss. It wasn't real. And even then, it had to be depicted as being under alien influence, outside. But, Uhura saying, saying to Kirk, as it's happening, I've wanted this for a while. It's just, but, the way this is happening, I don't like it. So it's, pretty clear that, that this is something that, was a big deal back then. And if it had been done in a way that talked down to people, it would not have worked. But it did work because you're actually respecting the intelligence of your audience and saying, look, this is just, if we go in and try and make this the focal point of the show, it's not going to work because, again, people don't like being talked down to. We don't like being preached to in a way that insults our intelligence. So, and Rottenberry, I think, made the wise decision to act as though, things like this in the future were just no big deal, nor should they be. And, so these were very smart and very respectful ways of having representation in media. Just as, a show like The Orville, again, you've got people from all walks of life in positions of, authority and respect. You've got Bortus, who's the second officer, third in command of the ship. He's comes from a species that it's all male, and so most members of Moclan society are homosexual. They have no choice because there are no females, or at least there's not supposed to be any females. It's implied, though not explicitly stated, that they engineered their species to eliminate females because they're hyper militaristic and they feel much like the ancient Spartans of Greece did, that spending too much time around women had a feminizing effect and a weakening effect. And so there's all sorts of implications with that. But you're depicting also what's essentially a gay couple, a stand-in for a human gay couple, that has all the same problems a straight couple has within a marriage, where work and cultural differences can help to strain a marriage, and you're trying to make it work because you love your spouse, you love your kid, and you want what's best for them, but the decisions you make aren't always what is best. And so, and of course, there's the problems that can come with any relationship, whether it's homosexual or heterosexual. It's a realistic and respectful depiction. Whereas in STD, that same dynamic is taken and used to hammer us over the head, and in a way that, and of course with season 2, you've got one of the gay couple's partner was killed off in season 1 and brought back in season 2 in a very contrived way, and they decide, oh, he's not gay anymore. It's like, what? What do you mean not gay anymore? I mean, there's no cure for gayness. It's not a disease, So, I mean, they're kind of doing this in a very ham-handed way that, is done really for the sole purposes of using it as a selling point for the show. All right. It's kind of like where, one of my favorite film reviews by a website called And You Call Yourself a Scientist, where they review Jurassic Park, and they note the difference between that film and Jaws. Whereas with Jaws, the movie sold the shark, whereas in Jurassic Park, it's the dinosaurs that sell the movie. And the difference is crucial because how enduring the franchise is depends entirely on the marketing, the way that the story is told, and the way that story is marketed. If you're marketing the movie based on what's in it, like some gimmick, then the audience is going to catch on to that, and they're not going to want to watch it. It's not going to stay memorable, and even if it does work in the short term, the long term is not going to age very well. And going back and looking at Jurassic Park and Jaws, as films on their own merit, Jurassic Park does not hold up nearly as well as it did at the time. Whereas Jaws, it still holds up in many ways, even though, they're both kind of dated and products of their time. But, Jaws, even though it's, 45 years old or something like that. No, I think it came out in 1975, but it'll be 45 years old, I think, next year. It's been around for the better part of 5 decades, and people still talk about it and watch it and like it. Whereas with Jurassic Park, you go back and that movie's a lot younger. It's something like 26 years old now. And, it doesn't hold up so well. And, I think the reasons are, again, because you're using something as a gimmick to sell the movie, whereas the movie really should sell the gimmick. And that is the distinction that I think that kind of proves my point. Where, yeah, the reason why you have representation in a TV show or in a movie or a comic book or whatever, it does matter, because if people think it's a cynical marketing ploy, well then, they're not going to like that. And it's actually being shown in diminished comic book sales, in people reacting badly to Disney Star Wars and Paul Feig's Ghostbusters reboot and CBS's STD. People are reacting badly to this because nobody likes to be pandered to. They recognize it for the insult that it is, and that's why they're turning away from this stuff. And so, yeah, I think it does matter why we're having representation in media. And if you look at a show like The Orville, where that representation is done right in a way that does not talk down to you, that actually treats you, the viewer, like you have a brain in your head and you know how to use it, that matters. That gets people thinking, okay, you know what? I'm going to sit here and actually think about the subject matter that's being brought to me, and, I may not agree with it, or I might agree with it. It might actually change my views, but, however, or whether my views change or not changed, I am challenged in those views and made to actually think about them and why I hold those views. And it's done in a way that, respects my intelligence, okay? And I think that's what The Orville does, as it tries to uphold the legacy of Star Trek, which, again, much like that and The Twilight Zone, gave the audience the benefit of the doubt that we are intelligent and that we can actually handle these weighty social and political subjects. And, you want to talk about representation? I mean, oh my God, dude. The original Star Trek, the original Twilight Zone. I mean, yeah, we had plenty of representation in these shows, although Twilight Zone, being late 50s, early 60s, there was a lot of stuff that Rod Serling had to fight just to get in there, but he still managed to tell these stories that, challenged our views on racism. And, if you're watching as a kid, it actually affects how you approach life later on. And a lot of the people from my generation who watched it in syndication, people in my older brother's generation, because he was like, I think like 12 years older than me almost. He's actually quite the bigot himself, and, basically a product of both his upbringing and his surroundings, unfortunately. We're not on speaking terms, but still, for people in his age group, growing up with a show like The Twilight Zone or like Star Trek, it did actually influence a lot of people to say, you're right. It doesn't make sense at the end of the day to have racism or to be, against people, based on this reason. So, I guess the point I'm trying to make, again, with all due respect to Council of Geeks here, I'm not saying that Z's wrong or that there's no validity to the argument. I'm just offering my own interpretation to why I think it does actually matter that there is representation, because the way you handle it and the reasons you're doing it, yeah, there is such a thing as doing the right thing for the wrong reasons, because at the end of the day, it's not the ends that justify the means. It's the means that, in fact, justify the ends. And if you're using the wrong means to achieve those ends, and ultimately those ends are not going to be, they're not going to hold up. They're not going to last, and you're basically not actually progressing as a society and achieving the level of equity that you were looking for. Because at the end of the day, cynical pandering to increase profit is cynical pandering to increase profit. You haven't actually changed anyone's minds. Anyway, that's just my opinion. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below, or head over to my Discord channel and chime in with your opinion. If you like what you've heard and you want to hear more, hit the subscribe button and the bell icon to receive notifications whenever we upload new content. And if you want to help support the channel, head over to our Patreon or subscribe to our page. Help us keep the lights on and bring you new content. Until next time, this is Michael Wilk for the Wilk Report saying take care, good night, I'm out of here.